The Principals podcast for this term will be a little bit different. I've invited two guests into the boardroom, and I have with me today both Ben and David. And Ben and David are going to talk about a program called Toolbox, which Oakleigh Grammar has been implementing recently with good effect. So welcome both Ben and David.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks, Mark.
Pleasure. So maybe you can start off by telling us a little bit about what Toolbox is all about.
Yeah, so we've basically taken the tools that you'd learn with a psychologist and we give it to kids before they need it. So we run a series of workshops and programs for students in year 5 all the way through to year 11. And we teach them skills like emotion regulation and how to catch anxious thoughts and all the types of skills and tools that it would often only take seeing a psychologist to actually learn, but we do it in a way that is fun and relatable and catchy for Gen Z.
So what was the inspiration behind Toolbox? Why did you both get involved in this program?
Yeah, so I'm a psychologist.
Yes.
And I guess throughout my studies and seeing clients, there was just a massive problem. Like, it didn't make sense to us. There were massive wait times, and there still are, to see someone like me. And it just doesn't sit right that people have to wait all this time to then learn the tools with a psychologist. Like, it seems backwards. Like, why? And this is where we landed on this. Ben and I kind of put our heads together and we're like, why do we have to wait? Like, why can't we take these tools that you learn with someone like me, teach them to high school students in a fun, relatable way?
So both of you have been into Oakleigh Grammar fairly recently. Can you just chat about which program you introduced to our school and the impact that it had on the students at our school?
So we ran a series of programs with the younger students in year 6 and year 7, and we were focusing firstly on how to regulate your emotions. So when you're about to have a meltdown, about to have a bit of a blow up, often those emotions can come out in all sorts of different ways, whether that's, healthy or unhealthy ways. And what we started by doing was showing the students, well, what are some ways you can, let a bit of air out in a way that's going to help you. What we also did with some of the year 7s is we focused on anxious thoughts. So for them, it's more around when someone doesn't message you back straight away, you start to think, oh, this person doesn't like me. Or if I get a bad test result, what I wasn't hoping for, what can I do with that anxious thought instead of going down the rabbit hole in a bit of a spiral? And the benefit to the school is obviously you get students who have those preventative tools, but it also helps on the back end because you've then got a wellbeing team that can actually focus on what they need to.
So is it structured activities? How engaged are they in the process?
I mean, really engaged. And that's a big part of all the workshops we do. We want to get hands up. We want kids sharing. A big part of everything we're doing is sharing examples or scenarios and getting the students talking about times in their lives when they're nearly about to explode or the big feelings have come up or anxious thoughts have arisen. So everything we focus on, it's not about us giving a lecture and them sitting there and kind of dozing off. We really want it to be as interactive, as engaging as possible. And we're just there to facilitate the discussion, really.
So our school at the moment, strategic intent is all about impact. What impact can we have on the young people under our care? So from your experience, what impact has there been on students at Oakleigh Grammar from your program?
So what we started to look through was some of the feedback that students were giving, and they were starting to say, even at a really young age, like year 6, that they felt like they now all of a sudden had these tools in their arsenal or in their toolbox, for want of a better word, that when something goes wrong, they are then able to kind of deal with it in some sort of way. I mean, the buzzword at the moment in education is all about resilience. And when you talk about your intent with impact, it's giving them that sense that I can be resilient, I can respond when something goes wrong in my life, at home, playground, wherever it is, because those challenges, they're going to happen.
So how do you measure the effectiveness of the Toolbox program?
So firstly, there's the feedback after the workshop. Yeah. We then provide the school with a set of follow-up activities where the school over the course of a term or 2 terms can then be running those in classes. And then we hope to measure that in 6 months or a year's time, like how many students are still using those tools. Because it's one thing to run a great workshop.
Yeah.
It's another thing for them in 3 weeks, 3 months, 3 years to still be using those tools.
The last few years have been quite challenging with COVID. More impact than I think anybody would have ever have thought or expected, and I understand that's why that was a motivating factor to start Toolbox as a program. Given the fact that there are lingering impacts of COVID for young people, in particular in schools, how do we reframe young people's minds so that those lingering impacts start reducing?
Well, you make a good point, because the impacts of COVID are far-reaching. Like, we work with around 100 schools across Melbourne, and probably the key thing that most wellbeing leaders or principals even tell us is that a lot of students seem to be a year or 2 years behind, even in their social development, in the way they respond to other people. They've missed out of 2 years of key learning, socialising, what to do when something goes wrong. And so in terms of reframing that problem for students sort of on a whole across that time period were stuck in their rooms, could hide away behind their laptops or their screens and not have to deal with the face-to-face. And so all of a sudden, now that they're back in the face-to-face environments, when things do go wrong, what we're starting to reframe it for them is ultimately the thoughts that you have or the emotions about an experience that might go wrong. There are certain things you can do to kind of get some of those anxious thoughts under control, or to let some of those big feelings out. And if you can A, remember it, B, find that it's of use to you, and then C, implement it in your own life, you're going to start to see some little incremental changes. And I think probably the most important thing about the program is who delivers the workshops. They're all recently graduated high school students, so they have that connectedness or relatability with the students, and they then look to them and go, okay, this person looks like me, sounds like me, they use the same social media apps, and I feel like this would be relevant to me.
So given the fact that both of you have been in this space for quite some time now, what advice would you be giving parents of young people, particularly where those young people are still struggling a little bit?
I think a big thing is, I'd kind of answer this in two ways. I think firstly, it's really just validating and empathizing with whatever your kid's going through. I know it's very easy for us as adults to just not look at a child's issues and kind of go, oh, that's not such a big deal, you'll be okay. I think in order for anything to happen, I think we all want to feel heard and seen and just understood. And what happens magically is when that happens, when someone feels heard and understood, then the gates open to okay, what can I do about this? I think we all fall for let me problem solve straight away, let me try and jump in and fix that, because it's really hard to see one of our kids upset. So I think it's empathize, validate, see the emotion, and then when that opens, discuss problem solving, not jumping straight into problem solving and not dismissing too quickly too.
I guess like any good strong program, and society changes pretty quickly these days, and I'm just thinking of artificial intelligence and so forth. So are there any modifications that you're making to Toolbox which will further engage with the young people and support young people?
Yeah, there's 2 or 3 things we're doing. The first is we've had a lot of feedback from schools and even teachers at Oakleigh Grammar that we've worked with, that we need to meet students where they are. And so where are students? Most of the time they're online. And so we're looking at providing some sort of app or some sort of engagement tool that actually gets them to follow up with the tools we're talking about on a daily basis, where it might have notifications or reminders for them to check in with what's going on inside them or use one of the tools from the workshop. So that's the first thing. The second thing we're starting to modify and taking on some feedback from schools all over is to start working on some of the communication that goes on between students. And as we spoke about before, students have now done so much communication online, but it's the face-to-face, being assertive with what you think and feel, but then also developing some programs that help them deal with the inner critic that happens inside of them, because there are so many students that are on social media and reading about all these perfect people online and thinking to themselves, well, what's going on with me? So we want to help them with those sorts of feelings they get.
And just I am putting you on the spot here. What would be your top 3 things, do you think, that are percolating with young people at the moment in terms of some of the troubles that they're encountering?
Yeah, maybe we'll just do one each and just keep on going. I think a big one we see is, a word for it is really social anxiety, but in a nutshell, what is that? It's, what are you thinking of me right now? And often it's not like positive, Mark, I think you're thinking of me in a really positive way. It's, Mark looked at me funny. Is he judging me? Does he not like what I'm wearing? Was that thing I said earlier stupid? And that can be really paralyzing for people, but especially teenagers in school.
The second thing that tends to pop up a lot is school refusal, and it's a hot topic at the moment, but it's disengaging with school altogether. And so, we talk to parents, staff and students about what is the fear there or the anxiety around it, and what are the thoughts that we're getting about why we can't engage with school, and being able to just find some evidence for why the thought might be true, but also why it might not be true. So that's a big one.
And then going back to, I'd say, the beginning of this podcast, when big feelings rise. The metaphor we use is, hey, we're just like a bottle of Coke. A bottle of Coke can get shaken up and explode. We're just like a bottle of Coke. We can also get shaken up and explode. Big outbursts, not knowing how to regulate big, very understandable feelings, but the behaviours that kind of come with it, that's when it can be a bit unproductive and painful. So it's really just learning to manage those.
All right, well, as we conclude the podcast, what's your greatest satisfaction out of the program that you've been delivering to not just of our students, but students throughout the state?
I think it would be seeing young people take some of these tools on that are often quite complex ideas, and that adults would often do without even realising. Kids in grade 5, 6, 7, 8 starting to internalise it. And I'll give you a story or an example. We've had some students who will, weeks after a workshop or a program finishes, teachers will overhear one of them say to another student, hey, have you got any evidence for that thought? And they're almost checking each other to kind of, rather than just being alone in the process of what's going on inside them, they've actually got a peer or a friend using some of the tools and helping them. So from our point of view, when we hear stories like that, and we heard great stories from Oakleigh Grammar as well, where students were implementing the tools, we're like, great, it's starting to work.
And I had another great story. We went to a school, and a student attended there, bumped into the mum came up to me and was like, oh, you're the guys from Toolbox, that's amazing. My son came home and said to me, Mum, I had this amazing workshop come through. I didn't realise I'm normal. I'm just like everyone else. And just a huge part of everything we're doing here is just normalising that we're all human. We all have these uncomfortable thoughts. We all have these big feelings. And just getting that validation. Everyone can look around the room and go, okay, it's not just me.
Normalisation is certainly very important, isn't it? So Oakleigh Grammar has a very strong pastoral care program, and we have been delighted to have both Ben and David and the Toolbox program within our school. And at the end of the day, it's all about supporting young people through their journey and their life journey, and there's no more important years than through their school. So thank you, both Ben and David, for coming in today, and we look forward to a continued relationship moving forward.
Thanks so much.